Welcome to the new Agility podcast. I'm here with Addy and Chris. Today we're going to talk about story points, that famous agile concept. And really we want to ask, do they actually work? Addy, what are your thoughts?
No. That's too
Thank
short.
you, folks. That's the end.
That's it. No, but
Hang on a second. I haven't put my tuppence worth in yet.
gosh,
No.
yeah. So I think it's from my experience. I was first introduced to story points almost many years ago now. I need to start counting as a decade ago or more. And I had lots of questions back then. There was an agile coach, one of the earliest agile coaches, if you like, and I had quite an amount of debates saying, yeah, why should we use story points? Why should we not use ours? It was quite healthy initially. But what I'm seeing more recently is people are just being told just use story points, and they're extrapolating lots of things from story points. I've seen the entire commercial statements of work being done on top of story points,
Yeah.
completely losing the origins of why we started using story points. And I'm sure we'll come to that, right? The value of the conversation it generates, getting different points of view, trying to save time instead of going into complicated Excel sheets, which I used to even before. There used to be these complicated Excel sheets. If some of you remember in the software world, function points, extended function points, all those kind of estimations that we used to do, if
Mhm.
you remember. So yeah, I think it's been quite a journey. And yeah, I always say that we need to take a step back and ask ourselves why we are using story points. Do we understand why it was invented in the first place? And does everyone who is using it have a bit of history and context before going running amok, I guess, with story points?
Yeah,
Yeah,
thanks,
that's
Addy.
Yeah, I
So let's
agree.
come to you, Chris, then. Why do we use story points?
As far as I remember, I mean, I'm thinking back to Mike Cohn's book on agile estimating and planning, where that concept I think was first made popular anyway. I think it was basically because of the fact that software is very difficult to estimate because it's not a I've always thought of this. It's not an engineering discipline. It's not like laying bricks where you can say it takes me 5 seconds to lay one brick, therefore it takes me 10 seconds to lay two bricks and so on. It's nothing like that. It's all about crafting and you learn as you go along. So how long is something going to take? You cannot possibly be precise about that. So the idea was to create something that was comparative in nature. Is this thing bigger than that thing? And when user stories were invented, that was obviously story points were a way of measuring the size, the relative size of stories. That, however, what probably 80% of everyone I've ever spoken to or introduced story points to cannot get wrap their heads around is that the story point has nothing to do with duration. The story point in itself is simply a relative measure. It's got nothing to do with duration, and they can't. Well, but we have to estimate a duration because our stakeholders want to know. They want to know time. How much in time? I said, forget that. Start off with this. Just do it, and then only once you fit that into a period of time can you say, well, 40 story points per 2 weeks or whatever. You can do that. So that's I think why it came about. But the problems with getting people to do it are many. Firstly, wrapping their heads around that whole time thing takes a while to get people to understand that. The second thing I think is, I remember doing this exercise with a team over a couple of months, 2 or 3 sprints, I think it was. And I took every story from Jira, put it into a spreadsheet, and put the story point estimate. And then I also put into the spreadsheet how long it actually took, start and end dates, and then I derived how many days it took. What was interesting is that when the variation in story points was anywhere between a 1 and a 13, I think it was, but the variation in actual duration was much, much smaller, more or less the same time. But the estimates were wildly out, were completely different. No one has a clue how to estimate, even in something relatively simple like story points. No one knows how to do it. So I think on that basis,
Yeah,
I'll go with, in answer to your first question, Heron, no, they don't.
yeah.
Not for that point anyway.
Well, I suppose that's the interesting thing. For every explanation of story point, there is as many people as there are explanations of it.
Yeah, yeah,
And I
totally.
suppose the confusing thing is they're kind of like Schrodinger's story points. They're about time, but they're not about time.
Yeah,
They're about a conversation, but they're about a hunch. They're about
yeah, yeah.
this, but they're not about that. Um, what ways have you tried to make them work?
Well, I think
What
I
things have you
want to go
tried
back
to
to
do?
something.
Yeah.
I want to come back to in answer to that. I want to come back to something Eddie said right at the start there. The conversation that you have that is supposed to result in this number at the end of it is much more valuable than the number itself. Because what you're doing is you're creating a shared understanding of what that requirement is all about. And what I've stopped with some of the teams that I've worked with, I've actually stopped even using story points. So in a planning session, you have the conversation, you ask the right questions, and once you have enough information, I simply say, will this fit into a sprint with other things? If anybody says no, then we split it. If everybody says, yeah, we can easily fit that into a sprint, that's it, just go and do it. Right? The debating about a number and spending another 5 minutes on each story doesn't matter. Just go and do it. It's small enough, do it. Um, you know, I think that once you've had those conversations, you're fine. However, I will caveat that by saying there are a number of organizations in which the stakeholders will not accept this kind of idea of we'll just deliver you stuff and we'll do it as quickly as possible. We cannot tell you when it's going to get delivered. We can tell you the sequence, but we can't tell you when. So we'll just carry on doing it and we'll keep you informed. A lot of people won't accept that. So it's a bit more about, no, I need to know when. And sometimes there are actually very good reasons why, because what gets delivered might be tied to marketing campaigns or training courses for call center staff, and a number of reasons why when it gets delivered is really important. So yeah, sometimes estimates can help, but
So
there are, as you
yeah,
said,
so
there are other
that's the
ways of
thing
doing
that
that.
gets me. I mean, I suppose the purpose of an estimate
Hmm.
is to help with predicting things,
Correct. Yeah,
right?
that's the original purpose.
Um,
Yeah.
if it doesn't help with predicting, what on earth is the point? Um,
Well, yeah, and the point is the conversation to understand.
but
Do
you can
we
have
do
a
we understand this
conversation without that, right?
without
I
estimating?
mean, you
Agreed.
could just
Agreed.
say, "Shall we have a conversation?" Maybe you could say, "Look, we're gonna write some acceptance criteria." That you can
Yeah.
have a
Yeah.
conversation by achieving
To
that,
do
right?
that. Agreed.
Um,
Agreed.
but I think it's a little unreasonable not to be able to tell people some kind of estimate of time of when something's going to be delivered, right? I
Yeah.
mean, any customer has the right to have some idea of when they're going to get something, right? I mean, I know we can talk about outcomes versus outputs and so on, but I mean, if you've got some feature, it could be for marketing reasons, could be for something else. Or it could just be a sense of how much time is this taking me and how much money is it costing me to do this
Yep.
thing. Um,
Yeah.
so there is a reason for it, right? But
Well, there are some very good reasons for it, and there are some bad reasons. Yeah, I think when, as you say, we need to know, because there's a very good business reason why want to know when we're going to get this functionality and can we, inform other people of that data. It needs to be then beyond that data as commitment. There are other things we say, well, no, I just want to know. You know, Also, how precise do you need to know? You know, if you want to know which quarter something's going to get delivered in, we can probably tell you that, and we can be, very, very accurate. If you want to know which day, especially, and the further out that is, the less precise we can be. So it becomes really, really difficult to do that precisely.
yeah, and I think
Um,
most people are accommodating to some extent of that.
yeah,
People don't
yeah,
ask for exact dates. There may be a deadline, but
yes,
then your planning should be, oh, we're going to be able to make this land at some point before
right,
that deadline, right?
yeah.
Um,
And if you can put contingency in place, yeah, that's fine.
I
Well, I
mean,
remember I have done an exercise using story points where we had a fixed scope.
yeah,
Now, these are rare these days, but a fixed scope project. I got the team in a room, and we probably spent half a day estimating story points for all of these things. It was fairly rough and ready, very affinity estimating style with all this everything on unwritten index cards, and we put them all out and we estimated. Well, I put them in a spreadsheet, counted them all up, said, right, that's our backlog. I'm going to make up the numbers, 600 story points, right? Then we ran through a couple of sprints, and we said, right, here's what we can do in average sprint. Project that forward through 600 points. That's how many sprints it would take us. And of course, it kept fluctuating slightly. But every single sprint, we had this conversation with stakeholders, like it's going to be sprint number 11, or it's going to be sprint number 12, or we've made up a bit of time, it will now be 10, and it was always fluctuating, but it was always a bit around about that time. But
But
because
that's
of the
how it's supposed to work,
transparency,
right?
correct. But because we were never precise, we were never really accurate, because this is why it kept fluctuating.
Yeah.
But because of the transparency, people were able to say, couple of months in advance. All right, well, we'll extend it out because you're much more confident that we can do it in 12 sprints than 11. So we'll deal
Yeah.
with that.
So Chris, can I ask you, in that
Yeah.
scenario, did you just stick to, while you were going through your sprints, did you just stick to story points, or did you actually go down to the task level
No.
effort? Because as you probably know, I'm sure you know, some teams tend to use both, right? So you do story
Yep.
points at the story level, and you
Yep.
start doing task level effort at hours, and then you
Yes.
sort of start knocking back. Okay, I can commit only 35 hours this sprint, and then you start knocking off hours
No.
based on the tasks you're going to do achieve a particular
Yep.
or a set of stories, right? So you
Yes.
almost
Yes.
have this dual stream of both story points and effort going in. And
Yeah.
then people tend to use story points for velocity, obviously. That
Correct.
itself
Yeah.
is probably a big topic on its own. We can probably do an entire
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
Yeah. So
workshop
this
on
is the thing about
velocity.
granularity, isn't it?
Yeah.
Um, I think, at the core of the principle of story points is that you don't have precision, particularly at the more granular level.
Mhm.
I often say it's like with the weather. You can predict that summer's going to be hotter than winter, but
Yeah.
you can't predict so easily the exact weather on any given day,
Yeah.
let alone any
And
given hour, right? So,
yeah.
That,
I just wanted to ask, this the Fibonacci thing. People have like all these different numbers, and
yeah.
I often have said, forget about all those numbers. Just ideally, just say, just count stories. How many stories can you fit in the sprint? Or maybe have like three sizes, three buckets
Yeah.
for your stories. Do either of you concur with that?
Yes.
I'm in that camp, especially if you're introducing a number of new practices to a team. Instead of overcomplicating their brain by throwing in Fibonacci series, story points, and whatnot, we'll say just let's stick to something very simple like t-shirt sizing. You can still have the same conversation with a t-shirt sizing,
Mm,
and then still have the same value. And
Yeah.
yeah, so I think you can still do that. If you really want to tie down things to your ability to predict and forecast, I would recommend that we use statistical approaches, use your throughput. So now I'm going more towards Kanban in terms of
right.
use your actual historical data to see how have we been doing on delivering certain types of tasks, and look at the trends, and look at the confidence levels, and
Yeah.
say, and then give a more statistically accurate answer, saying that I think we are 80% confident that we
Yes.
hit this
And I
time.
and I think that's the point, right? That once you start looking at a larger data set, you can have a bit more predictability. As soon as you start this precision at the local level, it's
Mhm.
I always call it fake accuracy. It's like people
Yeah.
pretending that they're being precise, when actually it's absolute nonsense.
Well,
And then
there is
when
precision,
you
but
aggregate, then is the more precision.
yeah, but if you try to get too precise, you wind up being inaccurate,
Well, that's
right?
it.
Because
That's what I call
yeah,
fake accuracy, right?
fake accuracy, yeah.
It's fake because it
There's a
has the
couple of things.
illusion of precision, but it's
Correct. Yeah.
absolute nonsense.
Yeah, I mean, talking about the Fibonacci sequence, when Mike Cohn, he tells a story about when he first asked some of his teams to come up with estimating mechanisms, And it was, 1, 2, 4, 8, 13, 18, 16, 32. There was 1 to 10. They come up with all sorts of different ones. But as soon as the team came up with the Fibonacci sequence, it was pure Fibonacci. So it went 13, 8, 13, 21,
Yeah,
and
but
so on,
why go
right?
that high? Why on
Well,
what planet was anyone on to go that
well,
level of granularity?
because requirements came in that were sometimes really big.
Yeah, but then are you
But
going to
before they
distinguish
had
between
been,
13 and 21? I mean,
but this is what happened. That's not the point really. But the point of this particular story, anyway, was that apparently they used the 13s, the 21-point stories, and they put those up on the walls. But when stakeholders came around, they had this incorrect idea that they were being very precise because 21 points indicated
yes,
a level of
accuracy.
precision that wasn't in place. Yeah, it wasn't accurate. So
Yeah.
then they decided to change it and modify the sequence. So it simply went 30, 20, 40, 100, which it gave us like we can be fairly precise down the bottom end of the range, but up the top end of the range, we haven't a clue. So I think I want to point out, Adi, you raised this thing about stories and tasks. I have yet to find any team that I've ever worked with who actually gets value out of that level of precision. And I'd say why? Because no stakeholder has ever wanted the level of precision that that will give you, but also the fact that the time taken to do when you're going through refinement and you say, right, well, is the story actually small enough to fit in a sprint? What story points would you give it? Now you break it down into actual tasks and you estimate those in hours. Estimation is an investment. The way you look at this, the whole point of estimation, it's an investment of time and energy in creating an estimate for the future or a predictability, right? How valuable is your predictability? If none of your stakeholders actually cares about what your prediction and your predictability is, just give it to me when it's ready. Why bother estimating at all? If they're really heavy on it and they have to get that level of predictability, then you can start spending more and more time in making that more accurate.
So I think that you're also referring to a point which we did not touch much is about the trust as well, right? So a lot of this
Yes,
trust
Yes.
and the culture of the place, right? There are
absolutely.
senior leadership who just want effort estimations to be done because simply put, they don't trust the people on the ground. So they want to see hours. They want to see people being productive, as productive as possible, right? So
I think
that
that's
that
a great point. Yeah,
yeah.
most of the kind of annoying practices that are imposed are because there's no trust. And so there's a sense
Yeah.
that by asking you to be more rigorous with what you're delivering and having a more of a handle on it, somehow that's better. But for me, just there's so much time wasted with all of this estimating. It's like for me, just say, does it fit in a sprint is about as much as I would like to ask, really, and say, okay, break it down into two sprints, even if that's
Yeah.
necessary. I mean, if you can say I can do it in two sprints, okay, do it in two sprints. I mean, there is
Yeah.
some function in breaking things down if you can, deliver something actually at the end of the sprint. Great. But more
And
often than
another
not, it seems like a tedious exercise to even split it.
Mm.
And another anti-pattern, I'm sure you've seen this, is when you start linking story points to commercials, it gets really dangerous. Now
Ooh.
people start gaming it now, right? So
Yep.
it's commercial. So they'll yeah, if you're a commercially aware professional, then you'll just start upping the story points because now you want some buffer in there to protect you.
Yes.
Yeah,
So listen,
yeah.
we're wrapping up. So I just want to get some final words from each of you. What would you say? I'll come to you first, Addy. What are the key anti-patterns and pro patterns of working with story points for you?
Let me start with the pro patterns, a bit positive. So I think the conversations are really valuable. Let's say you are using story points. That's the most important part. We need to recognize that the whole reason we're doing story points is to represent something very quickly, the relative effort and complexity and uncertainty involved. It helps a bit in terms of better planning and adaptability, right? So these are some of the positive things. The anti-patterns, there's a big list. So yeah, don't link it with commercials. Don't beat people up because they did not achieve the desired velocity. Don't link it to commercials. So the list of anti-patterns goes on and on. So yeah, so don't take it too seriously. I think there's value in the journey than the destination itself. Yeah.
Thank you. And Chris,
Yeah, everything that Adi just said. Don't link it to time as well. Yeah, it's not a unit of time; it's a relative unit of effort. It's just a relative unit of effort. But also, if you can get away without using them, get away without using them. Um, but if you need to provide estimates, they work provided you use them properly. Um, if you and bear in mind, it's an investment in time and energy to create estimates. Is it really worth the time and effort, or do you really want to just carry on developing what you need to, doing the real work, so to speak? Um, yeah, and the other thing I think is important that if your team is not very familiar with the technical environment and the business environment, estimates are going to be wildly out all the time because they just don't have enough understanding to be able to provide a realistic estimate. So in that case, don't bother.
Adi, Chris, thank you for that conversation. I'm sure we can have further discussions on estimation, velocity, throughput, cycle time.
Oh yeah.
But yes, thank you for today and take care.
Take care.
Bye,
Bye
everyone.
bye, guys.